Imagine you're driving through rural Georgia, nothing crazy, just the fields, trees, quiet road, maybe a few farms, and then suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, you see this giant stone monument standing there like it came from another planet. Six huge slabs of granite, no normal explanation, no clear owner, and carved into the stone are messages for all of humanity. Not just Americans, not just one religion, all of humanity. And one of those messages says, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Now, be honest, if you saw that on a giant stone monument in the middle of a field, your first reaction probably not be, whoa, what a beautiful environmental message. Your first reaction would probably be, wait, what? Under 500 million? What happens to everyone else? That's why the Georgia Guidestones became one of the strangest and most controversial monuments in America. Some people called it America's Stonehenge. Some people, thought it was a warning for future apocalypse. Some people thought it was just a weird tourist attraction, and other people believed it was something much darker, a message from secret aliens, a satanic monument, or even a blueprint for a new world order. And then, in 2022, someone literally blew it up. So today, we're going to talk about what the Georgia Guidestones actually were, and who have built them. What these stones mean, why people were so disturbed by them, and why the mystery is still not fully solved. And trust me, we don't need to make anything up. The real story is already very enough. The Georgia Guidestones were not Asian. They were not built by some lost, civilization. They were not thousands of years old. They were unveiled on March 22, 1980 in Elbert County, Georgia, near the South Carolina border. So, this was the modern monument, but it was designed to feel Asian, and this is part of what made it so strange. The story begins in 1979, when a man showed up in Alberton, Georgia, a town known for its granite industry. He introduced himself as R.C. Christian. But here's the first red flag. That was not his real name. He admitted it was a fake name. He said he represented a small group of Americans who wanted to build a monument for the future, not a normal monument, not a statue, not a memorial, not something for a local hero. He wanted to build something that could survive disaster, something that could speak to the future generations after civilization had gone through some kind of a collapse. He went to the Alberton Granite Finishing Company and explained their project. He wanted massive granite stones. He wanted messages carved into them. He wanted the structure aligned with the sun and stars. And he wanted to build strong enough to last for a very, very long time. Now imagine being the person at the granite company hearing this. A random man walks in, uses a fake name, says he represents anonymous growth, and asks you to build a giant stone message for humanity after the end of the world. That sounds less like a normal business order, and more like the beginning of a movie. But the project actually happened. R.C. Christian also worked with a local banker named White Martin. Martin became one of the few people who dealt directly with him. But then, he didn't publicly reveal the man's real identity, and that secrecy became a huge part of the legend, because when something this big appears in public, but nobody knows who really paid for it, people are not going to just shrug and move on. They are going to start asking questions. And if nobody gives them answers, they are going to create their own. This is exactly what happened. The monument itself was huge. It was made of 6 major granite pieces, 4 outer stones, 1 thinner stone, and 1 capstone across the top. The 4 outer stones were each about 16 feet 4 inches high, 6 feet 6 inches wide and 1 feet 7 inches thick. So there were not small stones. They were taller than a normal house wall. The stair stone was about the same height and thickness, but only about half as wide. The capstone on top was about 9 feet 8 inches long, 6 feet 6 inches wide, and 1 feet 7 inches thick, and including the foundation stones. The entire statue weighed almost 240,000 pounds. That is almost, 119 tons of granite. So, when people stood in front of it, it didn't feel like standing in front of a sign. It felt like standing in front of something that was trying to outlive human civilization. And the design was not random. The 4 outer stones carry their main messages. Those messages were written in 8 modern languages: English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Hebrew, Hindi, and Swahili. So clearly, the creators wanted this message to feel global, not American, not local, just global. Almost like they were trying to speak to the entire human species. The top stone, or capstone, had a short phrase writing for ancient languages: Babylonian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyph, Sanskrit, and classical Greek. The phrase was, let those be guidestones to an age of reason. That sounds calm, right? Almost noble. An age of reason, science, logic, balance, humanity thinking clearly. But here's the real problem. The rest of their message was not so simple. The 10 guidelines told about population, reproduction, nature law, government, truth, beauty, love, and harmony. Some of them sounded, harmless. For example, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Prize truth, beauty, love, and harmony. Leave room for nature. Honestly, those lines do not sound that crazy. But then you get to the famous one: maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. That is a sentence that changed everything. Because once you read that, the whole monument feels different. You start thinking, oh, this is just a strange environmental message. And you start thinking, who wrote this? Why 500 million? And what exactly are they suggesting? By 1980, when the monument was unveiled, the world population was already in the billions. Today, it's over 8 billion. So, when you see a stone monument saying humanity should be kept under 500 million, it doesn't feel like a harmless idea. It feels cold. It feels disturbing. It feels like somebody is talking about human beings as numbers. And that is where the controversy really begins. Now, to be fair, there is a less sinister interpretation. Maybe the creators were not saying we should reduce humanity to 500 million. Maybe they were imagining a future after a massive disaster. Remember, this was the late 1970s and early 1980s. The Cold War was still going on. Nuclear war was a real fear. Environmental collapse was being discussed more and more. Overpopulation was a major topic. A lot of people were genuinely worried that modern civilization might destroy itself. So maybe Arthur Christian and his group imagined a world after a nuclear war, after ecological disaster, after some kind of collapse. And maybe the stones were supposed to say, if humanity ever has to rebuild, do not make the same mistakes again. Keep the balance with nature. Do not let the governments become too corrupt. Do not let society become too chaotic. See a long term, that is one possible reading. And there is another reading. It is much darker. Another guideline said, guide production wisely, improving fairness and diversity. Now that phrase sounds very uncomfortable, because when people hear the words like guide reproduction and improving fairness, they think of eugenics. And eugenics is not just some random old idea. It is connected to some kind of darkest parts of modern history. The idea that human beings can be selected, managed, improved, or controlled. So we'll put that phrase next to a population limit, and then you carve it into a giant stones built by anonymous people. You can understand why people got freaked out. The monuments speak in the language of wisdom, but some parts sound like control. It's their nature, but people heard depopulation. It's their reason, but people heard cold authority. It's their guide, but people heard command. And because their creators stood hidden, there was nobody to explain it very clearly. No interview, no public debate, no full explanation, just the stones. And that silence made everything worse. The monument also had astronomical features, which made it feel even more mysterious. The center stone had a small hole drilled through it, aligned with the Polaris, the North Star. So, if you stood in the right spot and looked through the hole, it pointed you toward one of the most important navigation stars in the sky. There was also a slot aligned with the solstices and equinoxes, based on the important turning points of the solar year. And the capstone had a small hole that allowed sunlight to pass through and then creating a beam of light that marked the day of the year on the center stone. So the Georgia Guidestones were not just a message board, they were a candle, a compass, a clock, and a symbol. That is why people compare them to Stonehenge. Not because they were Asian, they were not, but because they connected stone, sky, time, and mystery. And when you combine that with anonymous creators and strange messages about humanity's future, you get a perfect conspiracy machine. Some people saw their stones as an environmental warning. Some of them saw them as a post-apocalyptic survival guide. Some saw them as a monument to reason. Others saw them as a satanic. Some connected them to the Antichrist. Some connected them to the New World Order. Some believed they were proof that secret elites had planned for a global population control. Now, here's why we have to be careful. The Georgia Guidestones definitely attract conspiracy theories, but that doesn't mean every conspiracy theory about them is true. There is no public proof that the monument was built by a secret world government. There is no public proof that it was a satanic altar. There is no public proof that it was an official plan to reduce the world population. But there is also no way to pretend that it was completely normal, because it was not normal. A fake name, a hidden grove, a giant stone monument, in modern languages, French languages, astronomical alignments, a message about keeping humanity under 500 million. That is enough to make people uncomfortable, and once the internet got involved, the story became even bigger. Before social media, the guideline stones were mostly a local mystery. People visited them and talked about them. Some people vandalized them. Some people hated them. Some people thought they were interesting. But online, the monument became much more than just a local attraction. It became a symbol. And the thing about symbol is that people saw what they already believe. If you already believe the global elites are controlling the world, the stones look like evidence. If you are worried about the environment collapse, the stone, just like a warning. If you are deeply religious and suspicious of a global environment, the stones look, just look like spiritually dangerous. If you think conspiracy culture is getting out of control, the stones look like a perfect example of paranoia. The stones do not change, but the meaning around them kept growing. Then come 2022, in May of that year, Georgia politician Candace Taylor publicly called the Guidestones satanic and said she would remove them by executive order if elected. That brought even more attraction to their monument. Then, less than 2 months later, in the early morning hours of July 6, 2022, someone placed an explosive device at the site. The blast damaged their monument and brought down one section. Security footage captured the explosion. It also showed a car leaving shortly afterward. No one was injured, but the remaining structure was unsafe. So officials demolished the rest later that day. Just like that, the Georgia Guidestones were gone. And honestly, the irony is so hard to ignore. This monument was built to survive disasters. It was built from 119 tons of granite. It was lined with stars. It was supposed to speak to the future generations. And yet, it only lasted 42 years. From 1982 to 2022, it was not destroyed by time. It was not destroyed by weather. It wasn't destroyed by an earthquake. It was destroyed by a person. Someone looked at those stones and decided that they should not exist anymore. And that maybe the most important part of the story, because by that point, the Guidestones were no longer just a stone. People were treating them like an enemy. And when society starts treating symbols as enemies, those symbols become more powerful than ever. That is why this story still matters. Not because the Guidestones prove some secret conspiracy. They do not. Not because every scary theory about them is true. It is not. But because they show how mystery works. A message becomes more frightening when the author disappears. A symbol becomes more powerful when nobody controls its meaning. And a monument becomes dangerous when people believe someone hidden, behind the curtain is speaking through it. The creator used a fake name. The girl behind him stayed hidden. The message was never fully explained. Then the person who destroyed it also disappeared into the mystery. So the story begins with an anonymous creator, and it ends with an anonymous attacker. One person built a monument in secrecy, another person destroyed it in secrecy, and between those two unknown people, millions of others created their own version of the truth. So one was the Georgia Guidestones, was the survival guide, a warning, a strange environmental message, a monument to reason, a monument to arrogance, a harmless roadside attraction, or something darker? The honest answer is we still do not know everything. We know the facts. We know the stones were unveiled on March 22, 1980. We knew that it is still in Elbert County, Georgia. We know that they were made of 6 major granite pieces, 4 outer stones, 1 inner stone, and 1 capstone. We know the outer stones were about 16 feet 4 inches tall. We know the whole structure weighed around 119 pounds. We know that the messages were written in modern languages. We know that the capstone used for ancient languages. We know the inner stone pointed toward polaris and have marked solar events. We know that the most controversial line says humanity should be maintained under 500 million. We know the monument was blown up on July 6, 2022, and we know that the remaining structure was demolished for safety reasons. But we still do not know who R.C. Christian really was. We do not know the full identity of the girl behind him. We do not know exactly what they believed. We do not know who planned the explosive device, and we do not know why that person believes the stones had to be destroyed. That is why the mystery survives. The monument is gone. The granite has been removed. The hell is quiet now, but the questions are still there. Who gets to write the instructions for humanity? Who gets to decide what reason means? When does the warning become a threat? When does the mystery become a paranoia? And when does the symbol become so powerful that someone decides to erase it? The Georgia Guidestones may be gone, but the things revealed about us is still standing there.